Darius Whitfield arrived in a tailored suit, prepared to lead a major tech summit. However, hotel staff requested he wait outside. What followed had a significant impact on the entire company. It was just before 8 a.m. when Darius Whitfield exited his black Lincoln Continental onto the hotel's circular driveway in downtown San Jose. He adjusted the cuff of his navy blue suit jacket, the tailored fabric reflecting the morning light. He was impeccably dressed, with sharp lines, a crisp shirt, and Italian leather shoes. He exuded purpose and meticulousness, yet the valet remained still, not taking a single step. Darius held his keys casually in one hand and briefly looked over. The young man averted his gaze, feigning a check of his phone, then turned to the car behind Darius. "Hey, can you park this one?" The valet asked his coworker, gesturing past Darius without acknowledging him. Darius observed the glass doors of the hotel. They lacked prominent signage. No red carpet, just clean glass and a tranquil foyer. There was nothing to indicate what would happen within those walls. He retrieved his keys, parked his car himself, and walked across the drive. Upon opening the front door, he observed a slight change in the concierge's smile. It disappeared as quickly as it appeared. "Can I help you?" The woman at the front desk inquired without looking up. "Yes," Darius replied. "I'm here for the SummitNet conference. I believe you have a Redwood room reserved for us." The woman quickly examined his face, frowned, and then looked back at her screen. "Do you work for one of the vendors?" she asked. "No, I'm the CEO." She blinked. "Right? Could you wait outside for a moment? We're still prepping the space." He paused. "I'm also the keynote speaker." There was no apology, no moment of realization. Just a tight smile and a firm response. "Still, we're not quite ready. Please wait outside." A colleague, a young man wearing a blazer and with a walkie-talkie attached to his belt, emerged behind her. He scrutinized Darius from head to toe, as if verifying his credentials. "Are you with security?" he inquired, speaking quietly. "I am Darius Whitfield." Darius responded calmly. "The conference you're holding today? I manage it." A brief pause. The man then angled his head towards the entrance. "Please wait a moment, sir. We will find someone to escort you." Darius exhaled slowly and deliberately. Attendees began to gather. Several initial investors were among the first to arrive. A white man wearing a gray plaid suit was immediately met with handshakes and friendly expressions. He wasn't asked to wait in the lobby. Darius noticed him, but the man seemed to hardly acknowledge him and proceeded through the lobby, accompanied by the same staff who had previously requested Darius to wait outside. The hotel doors closed behind him with a quiet hiss. Darius now stood again just outside the main entrance on the pavement. He glanced at his watch. The time read 8:09. His presentation wasn't scheduled for another 51 minutes. He possessed time. However, an unsettling sensation stirred within him. It wasn't anger, it was something more profound. Across the street, a mother guided a stroller toward the coffee shop. A bus emitted a hiss as it halted at the corner. Life continued its course, and yet Darius remained stationary. A mature man who had established a company from its foundation, feeling as though he was an outsider due to his appearance not aligning with preconceived notions. His phone vibrated in his pocket. "Boss," the voice of his assistant, Jalen, spoke. "Just checking. Did they greet you yet?" Darius stared at the hotel doors, his tone calm. "Not exactly." But that's when something shifted. Not in them, but in him. Jalen was still on the line, his voice low but alert. "What do you mean, not exactly?" Darius replied. "They asked me to wait outside." There was a pause, not shock, not disbelief, just silence. Jalen knew from his time working with Darius that his measured, toneless speech indicated more than just a report. He was analyzing and organizing the information. "Wanting to come down?" Jalen inquired. "No, Darius replied. Stay with the investors. They'll be arriving within the next 15 minutes. Let me manage this." He ended the call, adjusted his tie, and returned through the doors. Inside, the same woman at the front desk noticed him, but her expression remained unchanged. "I believe I requested you wait outside, sir," she stated, inputting information on the keyboard. "And I did wait," Darius said directly. "Now, I wish to speak with the event coordinator." My name is Darius Whitfield. I am the founder and CEO of Whitfield Dynamics. We reserve the Redwood Room and 2 floors of your suites for this conference. This time, she made direct eye contact with him. However, there was no apology offered, just a brief hesitation, as if she was assessing whether this was a joke. Mr. Whitmore, was it? Whitfield. A pause. She turned to the young man in the blazer. Can you call Gina from events? The man nodded and walked off. Simultaneously, a bellhop wheeled by with a luggage cart stacked with briefcases. Darius stepped aside and caught a glimpse of 2 of his board members stepping out of the elevator, each with branded SummitNet conference badges clipped to their suits. They greeted a hotel manager who seemed to have appeared suddenly to shake their hands. Darius subtly raised a hand, seeking acknowledgement. The manager briefly looked at him, paused, and then looked away. Ma'am, Darius stated calmly, refocusing on the front desk. Let me repeat this. I'm not a guest. I'm not affiliated with security. I'm not making a delivery. I'm the cause of these people being here. I orchestrated this entire summit. I brought 60 of the most influential investors in West Coast tech into this building today. The woman began to speak, but the man holding the walkie-talkie returned before she could utter a word. She's on her way, he announced. Following a brief silence, he inquired, You're really the CEO? Darius offered a subtle smile. I didn't just build this company, I financed it. I wrote the first line of code. I signed a contract with this hotel. And I chose this location because I believed in the idea of professional courtesy. Both individuals looked at him. He continued, I've got $5 billion under management. I was nearly ready to believe you could assist with that. The ensuing quiet felt unusual. It wasn't a reaction of doubt. It was awkwardness. The woman at the reception desk moved, appearing hesitant. Before she could respond, Gina from events entered the lobby quickly, carrying a folder and already speaking. Mr. Whitfield, I sincerely apologize for the delay. We weren't notified of your arrival. Please come with me. The Redwood Room is prepared, and coffee is being served. The investors are already assembling. The same staff who had requested he step outside now retreated, as if dividing water. Darius followed Gina past the desk, past the man with the walkie-talkie, and past the woman whose face was flushed now. Whether from embarrassment or an unknown reason, he remained silent. Explanation was unnecessary, because their misunderstanding wasn't a man attempting to enter a place where he wasn't welcome. What they overlooked, what they were unwilling to acknowledge, was a man who held ownership of the space. Remaining silent, allowing them the opportunity to adjust their actions, they did not. However, what followed would not be a demonstration of anger. Instead, it would serve as a lesson in remembrance, and Darius possessed a remarkable memory. The Redwood Room was located at the rear of the hotel's conference wing, beyond a hallway adorned with abstract artwork and subdued carpeting. Within, the lighting had been lowered in preparation for the initial presentation. Chairs were arranged in rows, a podium displayed the SummitNet logo, and a side table held bottled water and elegant name placards. Darius quickly surveyed the room. Jalen was positioned at the front, adjusting sound levels with the AV technician. Investors were arriving, engaging in hushed conversations over coffee. Unbeknownst to everyone, something had occurred in the lobby. He didn't proceed to the podium, not yet. Instead, he entered a side room, the private lounge reserved for speakers, and shut the door. He then retrieved his phone. Tammy, he exclaimed as his head of operations answered. We're moving the summit. There was no surprise audible on the other end. Tammy was accustomed to this manner of communication. Today? She inquired. Right now, he replied. You want to relocate 50 people with less than an hour's notice? Not want. Need, he corrected. She refrained from questioning further. You want me to call the Fairmont or the Hayes? Hayes, he stated. I want every investor redirected there. Make sure they understand this isn't a scheduling issue. It's a matter of principle. I will provide further details when appropriate. Please cancel the remainder of our reservation at Willow Creek Manor. Suites were included. If there's resistance to releasing the booking, please charge any associated penalties to me directly. Tammy released a slow breath. Acknowledged. Contact Jalen as well. instruct him to postpone the opening and redirect the guests. Subsequently, Darius concluded the call. There was no raised voices, no abrupt phone placement, only decisive action, efficient and straightforward. He observed his image reflected in the lounge's dark glass window. He felt neither justified nor triumphant. He simply felt weary. Weary of entering spaces where people perceived everything about him except his true self. A gentle knock sounded. It was Jalen. Shall we review the slides? Darius declined. Plans have changed. Jalen looked surprised. Are we departing? I'm already handling it. It took a moment, but then Jalen understood. They hadn't attempted to rectify the situation, had they? No. Should I inform the board? I'm taking care of it directly. Please ensure the guests proceed. No one was to acknowledge the hotel on departure. Within minutes, Jalen was discreetly communicating the situation through subtle handshakes and nods. Emergency relocation, he murmured to one group. We've got a superior setup just a few blocks over, he informed another. Mr. Whitfield will provide details. Simultaneously, Tammy was contacting the Hayes, securing their backup venue, arranging staff, transferring AV equipment, and lunch catering. Darius revisited the Redwood room a single time, returning to retrieve his notes and laptop. A hotel manager then emerged, his expression strained, holding a folder. Mr. Whitfield, I'm informed there was an error at the front desk earlier today, and I want to offer a personal apology. It was never our aim to cause offense. Darius interjected smoothly. You simply demonstrated a lack of standards. This isn't a matter of pride. It's about expectations. The manager appeared taken aback. Is there a way we can rectify this? Darius closed his laptop case and looked at him. You had your chance. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The only thing louder than outrage is absence. The room, moments earlier filled with leading investors, was emptying quickly. As Darius left through the same lobby where he's been instructed to wait, he noticed the desk clerk watching him, her lips pressed tightly. The young man with the walkie-talkie had disappeared. He continued walking. A black SUV was waiting outside. The driver opened the door. Darius got in, his phone already ringing. However, this wasn't the conclusion of the day's events. It was merely the point at which others began to arrive. When the first tray of croissants reached the now half-empty Redwood room, most of the guests had already departed, assembling in the grand atrium of the Hayes, San Jose's other luxury hotel. The staff at that location required no introduction to Darius. The reception gave him a welcome as if they had anticipated this for weeks. Simultaneously, at the initial hotel, the front desk staff appeared perplexed. The receptionist repeatedly examined her screen, reviewing the guest list and then the room blocks. A puzzled expression crossed her face as she reached for the phone. Gina, she said, the conference guests are departing. Gina, the events coordinator, was in the loading bay assisting the AV team in packing up equipment. What do you mean leaving? She inquired. I mean guests are checking out. Access was being revoked. Several individuals simply departed without comment. Within fewer than 20 minutes, the lobby, previously bustling with greetings and business cards, showed noticeable absences. Conference signs remained in place, but the atmosphere dissipated quickly. Then the manager received a phone call. Sir, the company has terminated all reservations. He appeared stunned. That's impossible. It's summit day. But it was, in fact, possible. The situation unfolded rapidly. Calls began pouring in. The front desk clerk appeared panicked, attempting to get the manager's attention while also handling a call from housekeeping. A guest had just departed without notification, according to reports. Another client stated they would not be paying for today's brunch. Refer them to Mr. Whitfield, someone else added. A security guard then approached the manager. That SUV outside, it transported him and several others. They're no longer present. The shift felt like a chain reaction, with one problem triggering another. Without any outbursts or blame, there was simply a disappearance. At the Hayes, Darius addressed the group, standing before a large projection screen in a bright conference room. He spoke deliberately and plainly, showing no indication of resentment. Before we start, I'd like to express my gratitude for your adaptability. I understand the change of location was unforeseen, but I think the place we meet reflects what we prioritize. A quiet acknowledgement rippled through the room. I selected that previous hotel due to its reputation, the quality of its service, and its convenient location near your offices. However, this morning, I was reminded that a refined lobby and a five-star rating do not ensure courtesy. He paused. I was requested to wait outside, twice, by staff who did not once inquire about my name. I parked my own vehicle. I reintroduced myself. I clarified my identity. Yet in that environment, none of it seemed significant. A few expressions grew strained. Heads shook. Some of you may be surprised by this. Others, perhaps not. He paused briefly. However, I don't endorse raising voices. I don't endorse diminishing others simply to demonstrate a point. I endorse progress. And today, we are making progress. To a location that acknowledges us, listens to us, and handles our business with the appropriate level of importance. The audience responded with applause, motivated by esteem, not sympathy. In the rear, Jalen observed, arms crossed, exhibiting pride. Simultaneously, at the initial hotel, the conference signage was being removed. Maintenance personnel removed untouched coffee urns. A catering team remained still, observing the scene and uncertain whether to start preparing the food. The manager examined a document he held. It was a formal notification from Whitfield Dynamics, ending their agreement, effective immediately. There would be no legal action or demands, only a straightforward severance payment and a significant financial cost. He contacted the general manager. "We're out of the event," he stated. "How?" the general manager asked. The unidentified guest was the event itself. While the hotel attempted to address what it had overlooked, Darius was poised to reveal a previously unknown aspect of his own history. The day progressed into the late afternoon. The sun cast long shadows across the street as Darius sat in the back seat of the SUV, his suit jacket folded neatly beside him. He had removed his tie, revealing the open collar of a white shirt, and a weary expression filled his eyes. Jalen sat beside him, reviewing emails on his tablet. "Are you certain you don't want me to draft a public statement?" Jalen inquired. "People are already beginning to post. Someone from Marlowe and Banks recorded a video of you exiting." Darius declined. "Let them speak. I'm not trying to become popular online." He reclined against the seat. The engine emitted a low hum. Outside, children cycled along the sidewalk, their laughter echoing. A woman wearing a red jacket assisted an elderly gentleman from a rideshare and into a small dental office. It was unremarkable, simply the day proceeding as usual. A sense of heaviness filled the car. "Can I ask you something?" Jalen asked, without lifting his gaze. "Go ahead. Why didn't you just confront them?" He continued. "They deserved it, considering everything." Darius hesitated before responding, his gaze fixed on the window. Finally, he said, "When I was 19, I attended my first interview with a resume detailing summer jobs and a GPA that promised opportunity. The receptionist inquired if I was delivering food. I smiled, confirmed that I wasn't, and waited 2 hours. The interview was never scheduled. It was an oversight. I was present and observed." Jalen looked around, remaining silent. "I had the option to create a disturbance, to draw attention, but I chose not to. I departed, seeking alternative exits, finding another, and then another." He moved his hands together, as though recalling the sensation of a steering wheel from years ago. "For a significant portion of my life, I believe that achieving certain milestones, accumulating degrees, wealth, and professional attire, would dispel certain preconceptions." He glanced towards Jalen. Jalen nodded slowly. It wasn't simply another receptionist. It was a complete hotel, a defining moment. "Exactly," Darius affirmed. "That's why I left. Because I didn't need to prove anything. I didn't require them to understand. I needed the observers to witness what it appears like when you decline to plead for respect that you have already earned." He exhaled, looking out the window again. "My father used to say, you can't force people to see you, but you can choose where you won't be invisible." Jalen relaxed against the seat, allowing the thought to linger. The vehicle paused at a traffic signal. Directly ahead, a billboard displayed an advertisement for a startup accelerator. It featured youthful faces, modern logos, and vibrant colors. Jalen smiled. You ever imagine we would be the ones leading those programs rather than seeking acceptance into them? Darius chuckled. Every day, and it still feels unreal occasionally. The SUV came to a halt before the Whitfield Dynamics building, a structure of glass, steel, and understated confidence. Upon exiting, the lobby receptionist waved, already summoning the elevator. During the ascent, Jalen initiated conversation. Have you ever considered sharing that story? He asked. The 19-year-old version? Darius replied, perhaps. Not seeking sympathy, but for clarity, because people often assume these incidents are isolated events. A single bad day, a single impolite employee. However, it's rarely about a solitary moment. It's about recurring patterns, repeated, honed, and concealed. He disembarked the elevator, briefcase in his grasp. Addressing problems requires acknowledgement, but it's also possible to demonstrate how to disengage with grace. What Darius didn't understand was that his actions, his silent resistance, were quickly gaining wider attention. The consequences began subtly. They didn't appear in news reports. There was no public condemnation. Instead, there were hushed conversations in meeting rooms. Then, a few emails circulated. By midweek, 3 other companies had discreetly canceled their reservations at the same hotel. There were no official declarations. No demonstrations. We're shifting our strategy. However, the discussions were very specific. Are you aware of what occurred with the Whitfield Dynamics team? We cannot accept that level of risk associated with our reputation. Could you remind me of the alternative venue? The hotel attempted to repair the situation. A regional sales director contacted Whitfield Dynamics, proposing complimentary bookings for the upcoming quarter, complimentary executive suites, and even spa credits for visiting investors. The proposal was not approved. Tammy reviewed it, then closed and marked the email as resolved. Darius did not respond, as trust, once broken, cannot be restored with price reductions. This wasn't a matter of incorrect charges. It concerned the events permitted under supervision. Simultaneously, news of the relocation reached media outlets. A technology news source reported on the sequence of events. It was not a critical piece, but rather a recounting of the timeline, the events, the individuals who witnessed them, and the change in location. A quiet, thoughtful pause followed. However, the narrative circulated through email accounts, then in messaging apps, and ultimately during after-work gatherings where young Black professionals toasted Darius Whitfield. Not for his response, but for his restraint. Because occasionally, the most impactful action isn't a forceful reaction. It's disengaging, as if the situation wasn't worthy of your presence. The Whitfield Dynamics office was silent as Darius presided over a boardroom meeting. He sat at the head of the table, accompanied by 4 senior staff members and 3 partners from a private equity group based in Seattle. An investor spoke, commenting, "We've heard about the switch. People are still discussing it." Darius shifted back a little. "Is that a concern for you?" inquired one of the investors. "Not at all," the man replied. "It actually conveyed more about your leadership style than the slide deck ever did," another investor added. Few possess that level of composure when facing intense situations. That's the basis of trust. Darius offered a subtle acknowledgement, refraining from any display of triumph. The focus wasn't about victory. It was about adhering to fair practices from the outset. Later that evening, he walked the quiet floor of the office, pausing to observe a whiteboard covered with written diagrams, sticky notes, and equations. Jalen was present as well, drinking from a chipped mug. "Did you review the report?" he inquired. "Yes, I did." The detail about the valet's actions was omitted, Darius noted. "They always leave something out," he said. "Doesn't matter," Jalen added. "People understand the situation. Those who needed to know received the message." Darius reviewed the whiteboard. "When we constructed this establishment, I didn't desire it to be ostentatious. I didn't want visitors to feel impressed. I wanted them to feel acknowledged. That's the key distinction," Jalen affirmed. "Do they see you now?" Darius responded softly. "They always recognized me. They simply never anticipated I would be the one authorizing the payments. He turned toward his office, extinguished the lights, and hesitated in the doorway. Let's continue building, he stated. However, before he departed for the evening, there was one more individual Darius needed to speak with, someone who served as a reminder of the importance of moments such as this. The following morning, Darius stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, holding a newly brewed mug of black coffee. The sky appeared as a flat silver, creating a sense of quietness and distance. A gentle knock sounded at the door. "Come in," he replied without turning. The door opened. A young man entered. This was Elijah Green, in his mid-20s, intelligent but still inexperienced, a junior analyst at Whitefield Dynamics. He held a folder, seeming hesitant about the timing. "You said you wanted to meet?" Elijah inquired. Darius turned, offering a brief nod and indicating the chair opposite him. Elijah took a seat, placing the folder on his lap without opening it. His gaze shifted, suggesting uncertainty about where to start. I'm aware of what occurred at the hotel," he finally stated. "Some of us were discussing it in the lunchroom yesterday." Darius remained silent, allowing the quiet to linger, not awkwardly, but calmly. "I suppose I simply wanted to inquire. How do you manage to not be affected by it?" Elijah asked. "How do you keep your composure when it's so apparent?" Darius offered a slight smile. "Do you imagine I remain composed?" Elijah hesitated. "Didn't I?" "No, that he was replayed. I simply didn't reveal it." He placed his coffee down. "You know what they perceived when I entered that hotel. A man present in a location they didn't anticipate. Nothing else held significance. Not the professional obligations, not the agreements, not the convention. Only their own conception of what authority embodies and who doesn't align with it." Elijah moved closer. "Then why not challenge them? Why not expose them publicly?" "Because the world is already aware," Darius explained. "That's not the core issue. The true challenge lies in demonstrating to future generations that you don't require their validation to take action. You don't need their authorization to feel like you belong," Elijah affirmed thoughtfully. "You navigated the situation with composure," he commented. "If it had been me, I'm unsure," Darius continued. "That's the key point. You don't need certainty. You simply need to retain this understanding. Don't sacrifice your dignity because of another person's lack of understanding. If they misunderstand you, allow it. However, ensure the foundation you're establishing for yourself, your company, your name, and your team creates a sense of inclusivity for everyone." Elijah paused, the sentiment resonating more deeply than anticipated. "That's the essence of leadership," Darius stated. "It's not about reacting aggressively. It's about creating opportunities elsewhere." A brief silence followed. Then Darius moved closer. "Now what's in here?" he asked, gesturing to the folder Elijah had brought. "Oh, right," Elijah responded, seeming to refocus. "It's a new proposal from the behavioral data team. We're incorporating changes based on your feedback from last week." Darius opened the folder and quickly reviewed the first page. "Excellent. Let's schedule a meeting with the team this afternoon." Elijah started to leave, pausing at the doorway. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" Darius replied, "For showing us how to progress." He acknowledged Elijah with a subtle nod. Elijah departed the room. Outside, traffic flowed consistently, as if the world remained oblivious to what had transpired. However, those who had observed would not easily forget. This extended beyond a single man and one hotel. It encompassed all the rooms people enter where someone perceives only a partial truth. It was about the subtle ways authority can exert itself, through initiative, not response. And it concerned altering the established order without accepting the tools offered. If this narrative resonated with you deeply, if it prompted reflection on how you navigate environments not designed for you, please discuss it. Share your thoughts. And remember to subscribe to receive more true stories demonstrating the remarkable power of quiet strength. Two men believed it was amusing to embarrass a mother in front of her children, until a mechanic, wearing a grease-stained shirt, quietly stopped them in front of everyone in the store. Roderick Blaine, 42, hadn't intended to be a hero that evening. He had just completed a long shift at the mechanic shop off Greenwell Springs Road in Baton Rouge. His work shirt still had a faint odor of oil and sweat, and his back felt sore in that familiar, persistent way it did when the weather suggested rain. He intended to quickly purchase a few items: milk, eggs, perhaps some smoked sausage, and return home before his niece completed her homework. She had been staying with him for several weeks while her mom worked the late shift at the hospital. They had established a regular pattern: dinner, cartoons, spelling drills. He didn't even use a card, opting for a handheld basket and a mental list. The store experienced a lack of congestion, yet a palpable sense of unease hung in the air. Shoppers with weary expressions, children complaining, a hurried individual quickly maneuvering past, someone proceeding at a leisurely pace. It was the sort of atmosphere where direct glances were avoided, and all desired a swift entry and exit. Roderick was in the process of his internal review and moving towards the frozen foods area. That's when he detected it, a voice distinct, piercing, rising above the subdued sounds of checkout scanners and squeaking cartwheels. A different voice then, laced with laughter. It wasn't a pleasant sound, the type that prompted a tightening of the jaw before understanding its cause. He turned, his attention drawn to the disturbance. Two men were positioned close to the freezer doors. They appeared to be about his age, perhaps slightly younger. Both wore baseball caps. One had a Bluetooth earpiece, and the other displayed a tattoo extending up his neck. Their posture seemed relaxed, but their voices did not match. They weren't shouting, but they were acting. A young woman, likely in her early 30s, stood nearby. She was wearing a faded hoodie and attempting to manage two children, a toddler in the cart and a boy around 7 years old holding on. Her daughter was upset. Her son looked down at the floor. The woman held her SNAP card tightly. Roderick initially struggled to understand every word the men spoke, but their tone conveyed their message. They said she should have waited for a man before having so many children. He thought she likely had a different partner for each child. The man with the earpiece quietly laughed, shaking his head as if the woman were a joke. Roderick halted. He stood there, 2 feet from the frozen peas, one hand still holding his basket. He observed the woman's shoulders become rigid, her jaw tighten. However, she didn't acknowledge them. She focused on her daughter, gently moving the cart back and forth as if it were a cradle. Silence filled the space. No one intervened. He looked around the aisle. The sound registered. A teenage cashier briefly looked up. An older woman close to the produce section stood motionless, feigning interest in a label. The moment lingered, as if everyone hoped it would simply disappear. It did not. Roderick advanced. He didn't move towards the woman, nor towards the man. Just forward. His heart began its familiar, heavy rhythm, the one that accompanies the confusion of anger and shame. He recognized this feeling. It wasn't precisely the moment, but it felt similar. Different people, a different location. Still, the core message remained. He observed as the young man gently pulled at his father's coat. "Father, may we simply leave?" He crouched down, murmured something into his ear. His voice was quiet, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached into his wallet. Silas paused. He wasn't one for conflict. Not since 1998. But something about that young man's tone. Something about the way he inquired, "Can we just go?" As if the disgrace was theirs, not the adult men. It evoked a feeling within. And suddenly, Roderick forgot about the milk and eggs. However, before he could speak, the man with the earpiece added something. A statement that halted Roderick again, this time for a completely different cause. The man with the earpiece remarked, audible to several shoppers in the aisle, that if she allocated less time to accessing food stamps and more to employment, perhaps she wouldn't require assistance. The delivery of his statement was significant. He spoke loudly, seemingly intending for the entire store to overhear. The impression was that he aimed to publicly shame her. Roderick's hand tightened around the basket, his knuckles turning pale. He remained positioned back, partially obscured by the end cap displaying canned soups. From his vantage point, he observed the woman's profile. Her cheekbones were prominent, her mouth set in a firm line. She refused to offer them the gratification of a reaction, yet her tension was palpable. Her son held her waist tightly, as if securing her position. The other man, identified by the neck tattoo, bumped his companion and scoffed, "Don't waste your breath. She's probably just going to sell that food to buy a new wig." Roderick blinked. He paused, thinking he might have misunderstood. But no, that was what he had said. Still, no one reacted. The teenage cashier averted her gaze. The woman examining the fruit labels now intently checked her phone. A young man pushing a cart filled with Gatorade steered clear of them, as if avoiding something he couldn't see. It felt as though everyone was attempting to vanish. The mother tried to remain composed. She didn't raise her voice, nor did she succumb to despair. She deliberately gave her card to the cashier, her gaze fixed on the small display as if her well-being hinged on it. The toddler had become still, aware of the strained atmosphere. Roderick released a deep breath through his nose. He was observing a woman being openly humiliated for needing assistance. A woman who, judging by her appearance, seemed to be simply attempting to manage the day with her children fed and her self-respect preserved. Two adult men, appearing as though they'd avoided regular employment for some time, seemed intent on shaming her. The situation felt disturbingly recognizable. He recalled a childhood memory of standing in line with his mother around the age of 8 or 9 at a grocery store off Plank Road. He remembered the burning embarrassment of the stairs back then, the way people looked when his mom presented food stamps. She never discussed it openly. She simply told him, "Keep your head up and hold the bag, baby." The memory triggered something within him. He moved nearer, now fully visible. "Hey," he called out, the word carrying enough volume to draw the attention of both men. The individual with the earpiece lifted an eyebrow. The other offered a smirk. Roderick maintained a composed tone. "Evenly, you consistently address women in that manner, or is it only when you presume no one will object?" The men paused, appearing uncertain whether he intended it as a jest. The man bearing the tattoo chuckled faintly. "What? Your boyfriend? Or something?" Roderick shook his head. "Nah, I'm just a man who understands the difference between a joke and bullying." That seemed to surprise them. The man with the earpiece struggled to speak. Roderick moved forward. He didn't act aggressively or threaten anyone, but he positioned himself close enough to no longer be a background voice. Close enough that people in the aisle were now paying attention. You notice a woman with her kids. She isn't causing any trouble. She was simply attempting to purchase groceries. And you decided today was the opportune moment to display how insignificant you are? The neck tattoo guy rolled his eyes. "Man, mind your own business." Roderick didn't blink. "This is my business. Anytime I see a grown man harass a mother in front of her children as if it were entertainment, yeah, that's my business." A silence descended. Not the kind that signifies resolution. The kind that suggests a change has occurred. The woman remained standing at the register. Her hands paused, as if uncertain whether to continue packing her bag or observe the situation. Her son looked up at Roderick, his eyes wide with confusion. Before either man could react, the manager arrived, and his initial words would drastically alter the room's atmosphere. The store manager's voice pierced the tension, crisp and concise, though somewhat delayed. "Is there a problem over here?" he inquired. He was a short man in his 50s. Heavy-framed glasses, a khaki shirt tucked into worn jeans. A name tag identified him as Vince Callahan, and his darting eyes revealed he's been observing from afar, intervening only as the volume increased. Roderick remained silent initially, wanting to ascertain the recipient of the question. The two men straightened slightly, seemingly realizing they may have overstepped. "It's nothing," the person with the tattoo stated, raising their hands in a gesture of innocence. "We were simply having a conversation," the other person added hastily. "No one made contact with her or anything." Roderick looked toward Vince, who returned his gaze, seemingly unsure of his position in the situation. "Talking?" Roderick inquired, his voice calm. "Is that what you consider talking?" Vince paused. "Look, I just want to avoid any problems in the store. Customers are trying to make purchases." Roderick inhaled deeply. Were you prepared to allow these two men to harass a woman in front of her children rather than address the issue? Vince reacted visibly to the statement. A silence fell, and everyone remained still. The mother continued to stand quietly, her hands now carefully arranging items into a single reusable grocery bag. She showed no tears. However, her expression held a detached quality, a type of emotional barrier people develop when they've learned to mask pain for an extended period. Roderick looked at her, then back at Vince. This isn't about comfort, man. It's about right and wrong. The words weren't loud, but they carried. A woman a few feet away who had been picking out yogurt suddenly nodded and muttered, "He's right." Then someone else, an older man in a camouflage jacket, murmured, "Ain't no need to talk to a lady like that. Especially not with her babies standing there." The tide was turning. The two men sensed it. The guy with the earpiece shifted uncomfortably. He stated, his voice quieter, "We didn't intend any harm. Just some playful interaction." Roderick turned, shaking his head gently. If causing distress to someone attempting to nourish her children is your idea of fun, a serious self-assessment is necessary. He spoke with clarity, avoiding raised voices or dramatic displays, simply stating facts. The tattooed man muttered something almost inaudible and began to leave. His companion followed suit. Vince made no attempt to detain them. Roderick did not pursue them either. His purpose wasn't to engage in a confrontation. It was to be witnessed asserting himself. Someone had done it, so that woman, her kids, and anyone else in the store would know. Vince remained behind, hands on his hips. "I'll speak with them if they return," he offered, his voice lacking conviction. Roderick didn't respond to him. He turned to the woman instead. "Are you all right?" She looked at him for the first time. Her voice was soft but clear. "Yes, thank you." The little boy peered out from behind his mother's hoodie, his eyes moving between her and Roderick. He remained silent, but he no longer seemed frightened. Roderick offered the kid a small smile. "You assisted your mother today. You performed well." The boy's lips moved slightly, as though he desired to return the smile, but hesitated. The mother then spoke. People generally remain silent. They simply observe, Roderick confirmed. "Yes, I understand. I have been one of those individuals," he stated, meaning his words sincerely. He had remained quiet in different locations, different circumstances, not out of concurrence, but because it was simpler, unlike this time. Just as things seemed to be calming, the boy spoke, causing Roderick to hesitate more than any comment from the adults. Roderick was preparing to take his basket and allow them to proceed without interruption when the boy looked up and quietly asked, "Are you my mom's bodyguard?" The unexpectedness and innocence of the question stopped Roderick in his tracks. The woman immediately turned, her eyes widening. "Baby, please don't say that." Roderick chuckled softly, not in derision, but in genuine surprise. He knelt down to be at the boy's eye level. "No, I'm not your bodyguard," he said, "but I noticed something that seemed amiss. And sometimes, when something is wrong, it's important to speak up." The boy appeared puzzled. "Even if it's not your mother," Roderick paused. "Particularly if it's not your mother." The mother retrieved her bag and reached for her son's hand. "Say thank you," she murmured, her voice remaining calm, but detached. "Thank you," the boy replied. His voice was softer now. Roderick rose, observing their preparations to depart. The toddler had fallen asleep against his sister's shoulder within the cart. The mother offered him a courteous nod, then refocused on her children and proceeded towards the door. Roderick remained standing for a moment longer, his basket dangling limply in his hand. His anger had subsided. He felt weary of encountering individuals who believed they could utter whatever they pleased to whomever, without repercussions. He was weary of seeing children learn those lessons without realizing it. He also felt frustrated by missed opportunities, moments that required the courage to speak up. He walked down the bread aisle, but suddenly everything felt wrong. He no longer felt like shopping. His appetite had disappeared near the frozen pizza. He drifted towards the self-checkout, considering he might just grab a drink, something cold, and leave. As he turned the corner, he saw them once more, the mother and her children, positioned by the vending machines close to the exit. She was searching her purse, likely looking for coins. Her son was sitting on the bench, softly rocking his sleeping sister. Roderick lessened his pace. A portion of him desired to continue walking. He believed he had already fulfilled his responsibility. However, something about her expression. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was weariness. The kind of weariness that doesn't dissipate with rest. The weariness that accumulates over years of being overlooked, criticized, and disregarded. He moved closer, deliberately. Got enough for the machine? He inquired. She looked up, visibly surprised. Oh, I was just checking if I'd change. She explained, adding, I told him he could choose a snack if he waited patiently. Roderick reached into his pocket and produced a few wrinkled dollar bills. Let me assist, he offered. She paused. I didn't request, she began, but he gently interrupted. You didn't. I'm offering, she finished. Her expression subtly hardened. It was pride. It mirrored the clothing his mother used to wear. It was the sort of person who prefers self-reliance, yet recognizes respectful assistance when it's provided. She nodded once, her movement now with less uncertainty. Her son selected a pack of cookies and a juice. Roderick inserted the payment and observed the machine's mechanical sounds as it dispensed the item, resembling a somewhat awkward expression of gratitude. What's your name? She asked. Roderick extended his hand. Tanya Wells. A tremor passed between them. A connection felt beyond a simple meeting. Her gaze settled on him, clear and unwavering, devoid of gratitude or obligation. Just even. No response was needed back there, she observed. I know, Roderick replied. But I didn't want your son to perceive that silence as typical, she confessed, pausing briefly before directing her attention to her boy, who was eagerly opening a package of cookies, as if it were Christmas. I hope he remembers your face, she said, and Roderick remained silent. He was at a loss for words. However, before he could leave, Tanya posed a question he hadn't anticipated, causing him to observe her and himself with a new perspective. You got kids? Tanya inquired. Roderick was taken aback by the question. It was delivered so casually, as if requesting directions. Yet, the underlying significance felt more substantial than the words suggested. He paused, then offered a slight shrug. No, not mine anyway. My niece has been staying with me. Her mom works nights at the hospital. Tanya nodded, indicating she understood. So you're the safe place for somebody? Roderick hesitated. He hadn't previously considered that perspective. He wasn't intentionally trying to be a safe place for anyone. He was simply providing assistance, doing what was necessary. However, the way she phrased it caused a feeling of constriction in his chest. Trying to be, he replied. They paused briefly in that unusual area situated between two vending machines and an automatic door, which repeatedly opened and closed as customers passed. The exterior air grew darker. The store's illumination made the location feel colder than it actually was. Tanya carefully removed her daughter from the cart, cradling her in one arm. The toddler shifted, appearing drowsy but making no noise. You don't speak as if you're frightened, she stated. I wasn't, Roderick responded. He didn't express a desire for a confrontation, she observed, receiving a slight smile in response. I've experienced conflict before, he stated. It hasn't altered much. Words did today. Roderick remained silent initially, because, honestly, he wasn't certain what the day had altered, if anything at all. The men departed as if everything were normal. Vince, the manager, offered little resistance. The majority of onlookers simply remained still and watched. However, her son had smiled, and Tanya was still present, standing tall. That surely had to signify something. At that moment, the automatic door opened once more, and the two men from before re-entered. Roderick's body stiffened immediately. Tanya's did too. She held her daughter closer. Her son slid off the bench and moved behind her, as if trying to disappear. However, the men didn't glance in their direction. They kept their gaze ahead, bypassed Roderick entirely, and proceeded toward the rear of the store. Perhaps they would return for beer, or perhaps they had simply forgotten something. They remained silent. They avoided eye contact. They didn't even acknowledge our presence. Roderick didn't pursue them. He didn't need to. Tanya released a long, deep breath. I anticipated an attempt. They will not, Roderick stated calmly. Not tonight. A few feet away, the teenage cashier, the same one who had averted her gaze previously, was now maneuvering a small cart of returns toward the register. She halted as she passed Roderick. I observed what you did, she said quietly. Roderick turned to her. She looked over at Tanya and her children. I regret not saying anything, she thought. Roderick nodded thoughtfully. You will next time. The girl offered a slight, almost self-conscious smile and departed. She made no attempt to turn back. Tanya looked down at her son. Come on, dear. He clasped her hand, holding tightly onto the cookie pack. Roderick observed them as they walked towards the parking lot. The little girl, now fully awake and rubbing her eyes against her mother's shoulder. Tanya glanced back once, their eyes connecting briefly. It wasn't a thank you. It wasn't a farewell. Simply a silent recognition, genuine and sufficient. He turned to depart, retrieving his overlooked basket, stepping back to do so. Yet, something felt altered. The eggs could wait. So too could the milk. As he walked out into the night, a personal realization sparked within him, a feeling connected to his past that he hadn't considered in years, triggering a memory with unexpected force. Roderick did not go home immediately. He remained in his truck in the parking lot, with the window rolled halfway down, allowing the warm Baton Rouge air to flow in as the sky transitioned from gray to black. The grocery store lights hummed behind him, fluorescent and seemingly without end, stretching long shadows across the parking lot. He gazed forward for a considerable time, his hands resting on the steering wheel, the engine off, not because he anticipated something, simply thinking, dwelling on a weighty feeling. That boy's question, "Are you my mom's bodyguard?" repeated in his mind, and the way Tanya had said, "You're the safe place for somebody." He hadn't anticipated either of those sentiments to linger, but they had. The recollection that surfaced wasn't dramatic or overwhelming. It was subtle and understated. Perhaps that's why it affected him so deeply. He was 10, waiting in line with his mother at a corner store just outside Port Allen. It was summer, and his shoes were 2 sizes too small. His mother had been working 3 part-time jobs since his dad left. On that day, her EBT card malfunctioned. The cashier, a man with a slicked-back mullet, told her to move aside. Publicly. Next, the man announced, "This woman can't pay." Roderick recalled hearing sighs and shuffles from the people trailing behind them. Someone even chuckled. His mother didn't shed any tears. She simply stood, attempting to understand where things had gone amiss. Her hands had shaken as she entered the numbers on the keypad. Her gaze remained fixed on the screen, as though intense focus might somehow resolve the issue. A man in a gray work shirt, a stranger standing behind them, moved forward and paid. He did so silently, without a word or explanation, simply sliding a 20 across the counter as if it were inconsequential. Roderick also remembered the man's boots. They were scuffed. The clothes were soiled, as if he'd worn them for years. His mother expressed her gratitude 3 times. The man simply replied, "It's all right," and departed. Roderick never forgot that. Not because of the money, but because for one moment someone chose to prevent his mom from feeling insignificant. And now, all these years later, he'd unknowingly become that man. He leaned back in his seat and rubbed his hands over his face. Safe place for somebody, he muttered, half to himself. He hadn't always gotten it right. There had been moments he remained silent when he ought to have spoken, instances where he averted his gaze. But tonight he did not, and that felt significant, not a resolution, but a beginning. He reached into the glove compartment and retrieved the small notebook where he recorded grocery lists and budget details. He turned to the rear, located a vacant page, and penned 3 words. Speak. Stand. Stay. He wasn't certain why he wrote them that way, but it felt correct. Like a prompting. Like a key. A collection of teenagers in hoodies walked by his truck, laughing and jostling each other, having just left the store with Slurpees and bags of chips. One of them made eye contact and offered a brief nod of recognition. It wasn't elaborate, just a quick movement of the chin. Roderick returned the gesture subtly. He started the engine. The radio began playing softly, featuring an old Otis Redding song. He allowed it to play for a minute before lowering the volume. As he continued his journey, he observed a city bus stop where a mother and her daughter waited, illuminated by the weak light of a street lamp. The young girl rested against her mom's shoulder, seemingly dozing. Roderick reduced his speed as he rounded the bend. That scene also resonated with him. He thought of so many mothers in this area, striving to manage everything, holding on with worn-out resources, and bearing the burden of groceries, children, and societal expectations as if it were simply an obligation. Sadly, they often go unnoticed. He drove into his driveway, turned off the truck, and paused for a moment. But prior to entering the house, he reviewed the notebook one last time, making a silent vow that would resonate well into the future. Roderick stood on his porch beneath a wavering light bulb. The screen door groaned as he opened it. Inside, the modest house held the scent of aged timber and laundry detergent. Lainey was curled up on the couch under a blanket, a textbook resting on her knees and a pencil in her mouth. She looked up as he entered. "You're gone forever," she said. He dropped his keys onto the side table. "Yeah, I ran into something unexpected." "Like what?" Roderick hesitated. She asked it so casually, unaware that her uncle had just been standing between a mother and two grown men poised to overwhelm her regarding a shopping trip. How would you explain that to a 12-year-old so it doesn't feel overwhelming? "I witnessed someone being treated unfairly." I said something. Lainey looked at him. "Did you argue with him?" He chuckled, sounding weary. "No, it wasn't necessary." "Did it make a difference?" He nodded. "It did." Lainey returned to her book, as if that was a sufficient explanation, but Roderick remained standing. He found himself repeatedly recalling Tanya's expression, or her son's inquiry, or the realization that for a brief period that grocery store had served as a learning experience, not only for a frightened little boy or a weary young mother, but for all those within hearing distance, and for him. Roderick had previously believed that demonstrating courage meant confronting situations directly and forcefully, that unless it involved a significant display, it was inconsequential. However, tonight brought a shift in perspective. As his actions were met with silence rather than recognition, they did not become a popular topic. No phones were used. There were no news reports, no widely shared videos. Just a mother, a child, and a man who chose to act instead of remaining silent. Perhaps that's what the world needs, discreet actions that have a subtle impact. Ordinary individuals who recognize an injustice and voice their concerns, prioritizing integrity over apathy. He entered the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. His hands remained stiff. He didn't notice until he placed the cup on the counter. Lainey's lunchbox sat on the counter. He opened it, almost automatically, to see if she's left anything behind. Inside, he found a half-eaten apple and a note he's written her earlier that morning. "You got this. I'm proud of you." He paused, looking at it. 4 short words on a sticky note. And she's kept it. That affected him more than he anticipated, because it reminded him that words don't need to be forceful to resonate. They don't have to be flawless to be significant. He returned to the living room, settled beside Lainey, and observed the math homework she was finding difficult. "Do you need some help?" she offered, silently passing him a pencil. While they solved the problems together, he looked at her, this small, brilliant, stubborn girl, unaware of how frequently the world would challenge her and how vital it would be to advocate for those unable to do so themselves. He wished she would retain this memory of him. He wanted her to recognize someone who championed another person, unrelated and undeserving of such action, yet still in need of protection. That's the essence of strength he hoped she'd see. After finishing the final problem, Lainey looked up and said, "You're like one of the good guys, huh?" Roderick smiled, a genuine smile this time. He tried to convey. She nodded, seeming pleased. "Good." A silence fell between them. The television hummed softly in the background. A dog barked once from somewhere beyond, then fell silent. Roderick relaxed against the couch, allowing the stillness to descend. He wasn't obligated to act as a bodyguard. He simply needed to demonstrate that he cared. And for this evening, that was sufficient. Should you ever witness someone facing unjust treatment and feel compelled to intervene, honor that impulse. Offer a word. Take action. Even minor deeds hold significance. They instruct. They safeguard. They are important. If this narrative resonated with you, even slightly, please share it. Perhaps someone else needs to read this today. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. Real stories like this deserve to be shared. A judge chuckled upon hearing that 17-year-old Naomi was representing her cousin in court, but the entire courtroom fell silent by the time she concluded her statement. The courtroom held a subtle aroma of coffee and aged floor polish. Fluorescent lights hummed above as Naomi Ellison proceeded through the double doors, holding a substantial manila folder close. Her walk was determined, though it was evident she had practiced it before a mirror. Her thrift store slacks were a little too short, the white shirt just slightly wrinkled, and her bun, braided tight and pinned, had loosened a little in the Georgia humidity. Despite this, she kept her head high. 17 years old, not a lawyer, not even a college student, she was present to defend her cousin, and she wasn't planning on being dismissed. It was late morning in the Berrien County Courthouse in Nashville, Georgia, a modest building where everyone knew everyone. This was not a courtroom known for dramatic proceedings. It typically handled minor traffic offenses, small claims, and occasional custody disputes. Judge Byron Talcott had served on the bench for almost 3 decades. People in town remarked that he seemed from an earlier era, a diplomatic way of noting his resistance to change and his limited acceptance of it within his courtroom. As Naomi announced her role as Deshaun Little's legal representative, Judge Talcott peered over his glasses, appearing bewildered. "You're what now?" he inquired, looking down at the docket. "I'm representing my cousin in this case," Naomi stated, her voice unwavering. "I prepared a written argument, and—" He interrupted her. "You're not a lawyer," he said, a slight laugh escaping his lips. A ripple of laughter spread through the courtroom. It seemed impossible that she was young enough to drive, let alone practice law. Several individuals adjusted their positions to observe her more closely. A man seated in the rear even smiled, seemingly anticipating an amusing spectacle. Naomi remained composed. Her expression didn't change, and her hands were steady. She nodded once, opened her documents, and stated, with respect, "Your Honor, Georgia law permits individuals to represent others in non-criminal proceedings, provided both parties agree." Judge Talcott raised an eyebrow. "And you're telling me he consents to this?" Deshaun, seated beside her in jeans and a t-shirt, leaned toward the microphone. "Yes, sir, I do." A subtle change permeated the atmosphere. Naomi cleared her throat and added, "I'm prepared to proceed if the court is willing." The judge reclined in his chair, pausing for an extended moment. Then he smirked and waved his hand dismissively. "Fine. This will be interesting." The bailiff, an older man named Wiggins, inclined himself forward a little, focusing his gaze on Naomi with a hint of curiosity rather than disapproval. Naomi organized her documents with precision. She positioned her handwritten notes before her, turning to the page marked Opening Statement. Her script was precise, so precise that it seemed impossible anyone could have written it hastily. As she prepared to speak, a laugh escaped someone situated in the back of the room. The judge made no move to quiet it, nor did Naomi. She simply commenced. Before she could elaborate further, the judge interrupted her once more. "Miss Ellison, for the sake of argument, could you please state where you obtained your law degree?" She met his gaze steadily. "I do not possess one, but I have dedicated the past 2 years to studying Georgia traffic law, civil procedure, and judicial conduct during my leisure time. I've attended public hearings in 3 counties, transcribed trial footage, and reviewed over 50 court opinions. I do not possess a degree, but I am present to ensure the court's time is used productively." The room was silent now. Even the clerk had ceased typing. However, Judge Talcott still had one more maneuver prepared. Judge Talcott exhaled audibly through his nose, seemingly considering whether this was a misuse of time or an opportunity for spectacle. He shifted slightly in his chair and offered Naomi a brief, dismissive gesture. "Very well, Miss Ellison." Naomi remained unfazed. She delivered her introduction with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed it repeatedly. And she had. In her bedroom, she practiced, standing before a mirror with her backpack used as a makeshift podium. Her voice remained steady as she presented the details. Deshawn had been stopped by police for failing to stop at a stop sign outside the high school on a Saturday morning. There was no other traffic and no pedestrians present. Despite this, the infraction resulted in a court summons and a significant financial penalty. Naomi's goal wasn't merely to dispute the fine. She aimed for its complete dismissal. In the second row, a white woman wearing a peach blazer spoke softly to the man beside her. He responded with a chuckle and a shake of his head. The clerk reclined in her chair, clicking her pen, anticipating Naomi's misstep. And Deshawn? He glanced at his hands, apprehensive, perhaps even a little irritated. "You sure you want to do this?" He had asked her that morning while they waited outside the courthouse. Naomi had answered without lifting her eyes from her notes. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." He remained silent after that. Now, seated beside her at the defendant's table, he fidgeted in his chair, seemingly wishing he could vanish. He was 17 as well, but Naomi made him feel even younger simply by being next to him. Naomi then addressed the matter of selective enforcement. The stop sign in question had been disregarded by numerous drivers that morning, including 2 local sheriff's deputies. Naomi possessed video footage captured by a neighbor, which was time-stamped and easily discernible. The footage displayed vehicles proceeding without interruption. There were no visible lights, no audible sirens, and no issued citations. She positioned a small USB drive on the table and raised her gaze toward the judge. "With the court's permission, I'd like to submit this as evidence." Judge Talcott remained still for a moment. Then, deliberately, he turned his attention to the bailiff. "Let's take a look." The screen activated. The courtroom's attention focused. The video consisted of straightforward street footage captured by a home security camera. Vehicle after vehicle passed the sign without pausing. Naomi allowed the recording to play for 20 seconds before stopping it and indicating a license plate belonging to a county sheriff. "I'm not suggesting that the law shouldn't be enforced," she stated, "only that it should be enforced fairly." There was no laughter this time. The judge, however, crossed his arms. "And you believe this demonstrates your cousin was treated unfairly?" Naomi replied concisely. "It demonstrates that enforcement lacks consistency. And when enforcement lacks consistency, citations can become subjective." He observed her intently for a moment. Naomi remained composed under his gaze. What the majority of individuals present didn't realize, couldn't possibly know, was her dedication over the previous 2 summers, secretly attending hearings in 3 counties. She documented proceedings with a well-used pen, quietly reciting legal terminology into a tape recorder obtained from her science teacher. No one had instructed her in these actions. Her high school lacked law electives, and internship opportunities for girls like her were scarce in Berrien County. Consequently, she pursued self-study. She dedicated late nights to reading legal blogs and case opinions while her mom worked double shifts at the nursing home. She prioritized this over socializing, foregoing parties and school dances. It was her chosen path. Now, upon her first opportunity to apply her knowledge, those present perceived her as a young person pretending. "I'll accept her." The judge cleared his throat. "We'll admit the video for review." "Continue." Naomi nodded and kept going, but the atmosphere hadn't changed yet. People still looked at her as if this would inevitably fail. But then Naomi said something that even made the court reporter lift her head. Naomi placed her palms flat on the table, leaned in just a little, and said, "This citation isn't just about a stop sign. It's about accountability. The question of whether authority figures, including officers, are held to the same standards as those they stop." That specific phrasing resonated powerfully. It didn't appear scripted, but its impact was undeniable. A noticeable silence fell over the room, unlike any that had come before. The murmuring ceased, and the expressions softened. The clerk paused her pen-chewing habit. Even Judge Talcott reacted, seemingly surprised by her candid remark. Deshawn observed his cousin with a newfound perspective. He had always recognized her intelligence. Family members had expressed similar sentiments. However, this situation felt different. Naomi proceeded swiftly, turning to the subsequent page of her materials. Her notes were meticulously organized with a color-coded highlighting system. Blue indicated facts, green represented legal principles, and yellow marked quotes she had committed to memory. She began discussing Owens versus State of Georgia, a 1999 case concerning traffic enforcement and racial bias. She methodically reviewed the court's opinion, detailing it line by line, and clarified how the court recognized that unequal enforcement damaged public confidence. The judge intervened. "Ms. Ellison, are you drawing a comparison to the Owens case?" "That involved." She remained steady. "The relevant legal principles remain applicable, Your Honor. Selective enforcement compromises the fairness of any legal process, irrespective of whether it is criminal or civil." He reclined once more, his expression now neutral. The courtroom was fully engaged as well. The woman in the peach blazer now sat forward, resting her elbows on her knees, and intently listened. The man beside her put away his phone. Naomi proceeded. She presented traffic enforcement statistics from Willow Creek County, figures she had obtained via a Freedom of Information Act request and printed at the public library. The data revealed that 83% of traffic stops during the previous year involved black drivers, while census data indicated they comprised just under 40% of the population. She placed the documents before her. "I'm not suggesting anyone intentionally targeted my cousin," she stated. "The court is being asked to consider the established pattern. Ignoring patterns allows them to persist. This presentation is devoid of theatrics or raised voices. It is simply a recitation of facts and a quiet, direct assessment." Judge Talcott reviewed his notes, tapped his pen against the folder before him, then made a notation. The bailiff, Wiggins, folded his arms, not as an act of opposition, but in attentive listening. Deshawn murmured, "Yo, did you really obtain all those numbers?" Naomi murmured, her gaze fixed on the judge. "It took me 3 weeks." Deshawn blinked, surprised by the intensity of her statement. A cough echoed from a few rows behind. Yet no one chuckled. The judge remained silent, examining the printed documents before returning his attention to Naomi. "You've certainly done your homework, Miss Ellison," he observed. She offered a single nod, composed and prepared. Then, for the first time since she entered the courtroom, Naomi hesitated. The silence wasn't due to a lapse in her speech, but because she had arrived at the critical juncture of her argument. Her statement emphasized that the matter wasn't about achieving victory, it was about fairness. She affirmed that if the court found her cousin had indeed violated the law, they would abide by the decision. However, she insisted that if citations were to be issued in Cedar Creek County, they needed to carry consistent meaning regardless of the driver. This was the pivotal moment, not when she referenced legal precedent, nor when she presented the statistics. The sincerity of that statement seemed to resonate, and the judge closed his folder. "Let's take a 10-minute recess." Gasps weren't permitted in courtrooms, yet they were audible, noticeable in the subtle shifts of people and the murmured comment, "He never does that." During that brief pause, Naomi experienced her initial wave of genuine uncertainty. She sat on the unyielding wooden bench outside the courtroom, knees drawn close, hands tightly clasped around a bottle of water she hadn't opened. The braid at the nape of her neck was loosening, but she made no move to adjust it. She fixed her gaze straight ahead, seemingly observing something unseen by others. Deshawn sat next to her, his leg bouncing, his eyes darting frequently. "You good?" he eventually asked. She nodded, then murmured, "Yeah, but you don't seem it." A faint smile touched her lips. "I didn't come here to look good," he chuckled, then added more seriously, "Hey, thank you. For real. I didn't think you'd go that deep." She turned towards him. "You didn't think I meant it?" "I mean, I knew you were smart. I simply didn't realize you were this intelligent." Naomi did not respond. The courtroom door opened, and the bailiff motioned toward them. "Let's return to the matter at hand." Inside, the atmosphere had changed. The laughter from before had disappeared, yielding to a more subdued feeling. It wasn't quite respect. It wasn't quite admiration. It was simply focused attention. Judge Talcott observed Naomi when she re-entered. This time, he didn't squint or smirk. He continued to evaluate her. Miss Ellison, he stated as she resumed her testimony, let's hypothetically consider, just for a moment, that your assertion is valid. Could you please reference any specific wording in the law that would directly justify dismissing your cousin's citation? Naomi responded promptly. Yes, sir. Georgia Code, Section 40 to 620 details proper stop sign enforcement, but it also allows for interpretation regarding situations where enforcement might be applied unevenly or selectively. Moreover, the Equal Protection Clause, as defined in Yick Wo v. Hopkins, dictates that selective enforcement predicated on arbitrary distinctions compromises the law's legitimacy. The courtroom fell silent once more. The judge inclined himself forward, resting his elbows on his desk, observing her as if searching for a weakness. I notice you're quite well informed, he remarked. Yes, Your Honor. He then stated, his voice a little more pointed, that if she intended to cite Yick Wo, she should also be ready to discuss its relevance beyond licensing matters. She affirmed, explaining that the ruling's core principle extended beyond licenses. It concerned fairness under the law. The ruling explicitly stated that even seemingly neutral laws could not be applied in a discriminatory manner. For the first time, Judge Talcott refrained from interrupting, allowing her to complete her statement. He then folded his hands and looked directly at her. Miss Ellison, he said, speaking almost calmly now, what exactly do you want from this court? Naomi took a breath. I want my cousin's citation dismissed, and I want the court to acknowledge that enforcement patterns in this county deserve closer scrutiny. She didn't yell. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The judge examined the documents before him, then surveyed the courtroom, and lastly turned his gaze to Naomi. Unexpectedly, he posed a question. May I review your notes? Naomi was taken aback. I'm sorry, he repeated. Your notes. It's evident you've invested significant effort. I'd appreciate the opportunity to examine them. The inquiry was unusual. Judges rarely made such requests. Naomi approached and presented the notes. Her hand briefly touched the bench, but she maintained her balance. The judge examined the pages, methodically, handwritten, color-coded, and arranged with the precision of a junior associate at a leading downtown Atlanta firm. This is remarkable, he stated after a prolonged pause. The courtroom remained silent. He then added, however, you must understand that argument isn't always sufficient in court. Sometimes, regardless of how just you are, the structure doesn't yield. Naomi did not avert her gaze. Then perhaps the structure requires pressure. The judge raised an eyebrow, but before he could respond, someone in the gallery stood. The woman who stood in the back row appeared to be in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back tightly and a black blouse buttoned to the neck. She seemed like someone who didn't speak unless it was important. Your Honor, she called out, her voice steady but quiet. Judge Talcott turned slowly. Ma'am, you need to sit down. This isn't open for public comment. But the woman did not flinch. I am Judith Minter. As a retired attorney with 41 years of experience in civil litigation, I feel compelled to state, for the record, that this young lady presented one of the most well-structured arguments I've observed in a courtroom, even among federal proceedings. While gasps weren't permitted, an audible intake of breath was clearly heard from half the gallery. Judge Talcott visibly stiffened but remained silent, simply observing Naomi. A fleeting, unreadable expression crossed his face. Frustration? Perhaps. Or something else entirely. He announced another recess. Naomi hurried outside. Her chest felt constricted, and her hands trembled slightly this time. Not from fear, but from the weight of everything. The room, the atmosphere, the abrupt quiet that followed the woman's statement. Deshawn followed her and sat next to her once more. You all right? He inquired. She hesitated before responding. Her fingers moved restlessly in her lap. Why would she say that? Naomi asked, almost to herself. Why would someone like her defend me? Deshawn shrugged, because she observed what everyone else had seen. Naomi allowed her shoulders to relax a little. Her entire body had been rigid for more than an hour, and she hadn't been aware of it. The courtroom doors opened again, and Naomi was surprised when Judith Minter emerged and approached her. Miss Ellison, she said softly as she sat down next to her on the bench. Do you understand the sort of bravery it requires to stand where you just stood? Particularly without the qualifications. That's not something that can be fabricated. Naomi began to speak, but Judith raised a hand. I'm not attempting to compliment you, she said. I'm stating a fact. And if you ever consider a career in law, I mean professionally, please contact me. I know individuals who would be fortunate to guide someone with your potential. Naomi paused, unsure how to respond. All she could say was, thank you. Judith smiled, then rose. Finish well. Don't allow him to manipulate you. He possesses more intelligence than he conveys, but he's likely to show you deference if you remain perceptive. Following that, the woman vanished down the hallway, her heels clicking softly against the tile. Deshawn turned to Naomi, a combination of awe and disbelief evident on his face. Yo, who are you right now? She offered a quiet, almost weary laugh. I'm just me. However, something in her demeanor had shifted. The anxiety was still present, but it no longer dominated. Not entirely. The bailiff entered the room. They're ready. Naomi stood, adjusted her shirt, and retrieved her folder. As she re-entered the courtroom, there were no whispers, no smirks, and Judge Talcott no longer leaned back as if dismissing her. Instead, he leaned forward. Naomi returned to the table, arranged her closing statement, and awaited approval. The judge offered a brief nod. Proceed. She took a final breath to compose herself, and then she began. The words she was about to speak would silence the entire courtroom. Naomi spoke calmly, no need for raised tones. My cousin is a teenager. He committed a minor error. But if the law isn't applied equally to all, young, old, black, white, officer, civilian, then it ceases to be law. It transforms into a suggestion, or, even more detrimentally, punishment for some and a caution for others. A stillness fell over the room. No one moved. Every gaze in that room was focused on her. Even the clerk, who had kept her fingers poised over the keyboard, was frozen midair. She continued, we've all heard that justice is blind, but it shouldn't be deaf. It shouldn't ignore patterns, or silence people who speak up about them. Naomi walked slowly to the evidence table, pulled up the citation, and held it out. This citation isn't just about a stop sign. It's about the choice to enforce, or not enforce, the law based on who's in the driver's seat. Her voice remained steady, almost calm, but her words carried significant weight. She addressed the judge. You inquired previously about what I sought from this court. I stated then that I desired the citation dismissed, and I maintain that desire. However, I also want recognition that fairness should not be something earned through appearances or background. It should be inherent, a given, for all. Judge Talcott looked down, tapping the citation folder again with the corner of his pen. He remained silent. Not yet. I may not hold a degree, Naomi stated, but I've gained knowledge observing courtrooms and opinions and law books over the past 2 years. I've learned that when justice functions correctly, it isn't felt as dominance. It feels like understanding, like recognition that you were listened to. Her voice faltered just a little at that final word. Not enough to disrupt her flow, but enough to serve as a reminder to those present that she remained a teenager. Still human. Still someone who shouldn't have been required to prepare for this. She closed her folder and stepped back. Silence. A full 10 seconds elapsed before Judge Talcott finally exhaled. He adjusted his glasses, surveyed the courtroom, then focused his eyes on Naomi. I've been doing this for a long time, he said. Long enough to recognize when someone enters this courtroom with something prepared, and when they enter with something authentic. He paused. You, Miss Ellison, you presented something authentic. Another pause. I am dismissing the citation. The issue isn't related to your cousin's connections, but rather the manner in which you presented this case. Furthermore, the evidence you offered prompted questions that this court cannot disregard. A murmur arose within the gallery, marked by surprise, quietness, and deference, yet he had not concluded. Judge Talcott moved forward, placing his hands on the desk. To be candid, I initially found amusement in your presentation, and that was an error. You didn't simply prepare, you informed this courtroom, and myself included. You maintained your position in a setting not intended for someone of your stature to speak with authority. And I believe this will not be the last instance he tapped the gavel once. Not forcefully, simply to conclude proceedings. Court is adjourned. Naomi remained still initially. Deshawn observed her as if she were an unfamiliar person. Or perhaps he was at long last perceiving the version of her that had always existed. Those present in the gallery did not immediately leave. Several approached her discreetly. The clerk even nodded once, murmuring, "Nice work, kid." Naomi held her folder close to her chest again. But now it didn't seem like a shield. It felt like a credential. As she and Deshawn walked out into the sun, he nudged her. "You're going to be on somebody's billboard one day." She laughed. "Not unless they catch me on a good hair day." He smiled wide. "Nah, I mean it. You changed something in there." Naomi looked ahead at the street, eyes squinting against the light. "I hope so." What followed would demonstrate that this instance marked merely the commencement of events. A week later, Naomi found herself once again in her bedroom, amidst piles of notebooks, scattered pens, and her age school laptop adorned with discolored stickers. Her triumph at the courthouse had been reported in the local news. It wasn't extensive coverage, simply a few brief mentions in the Nashville Herald and a Facebook post from an individual who had been present in the gallery. However, the phone call that fundamentally altered the situation did not originate from a journalist. The call originated from the office of attorney Roland Brewster, located in Macon. She nearly ignored it, as the phone number was unknown and her mom had cautioned her against answering unrecognized calls. However, an intuition prompted her to answer. "Is this Naomi Ellison?" A voice inquired. "Yes," she replied. "This is Angela from the office of Roland Brewster. He would like to speak with you, if you're available." Naomi straightened on the bed. Certainly?" A click was heard. A man's voice then spoke, warm yet straightforward. "Naomi, my name is Roland. I've been practicing law in Georgia for 27 years. A colleague of mine, Judith Minter, sent me a copy of your court presentation. She said I'd be a fool not to reach out." Naomi remained silent initially, not due to nerves, as she wasn't feeling them. She was simply uncertain if it was genuine. "I want to offer you something," he continued. "It's not a job, yet, but it's a mentorship, one that could develop into something further. There's a summer program designed for young, creative thinkers. We want you to be a part of it." She discovered her ability to speak up. "But I haven't started college yet. I haven't even finished high school." He chuckled. "That's not important. We're not seeking degrees. We're looking for minds capable of sparking change." Naomi looked at her notes. The same ones she'd used in court, now spread across her desk like discarded awards. "I'm intrigued," she said. "Excellent," Brewster replied. "Please send me a copy of that argument." Following the call, Naomi remained still for an extended period. She didn't move or smile, simply taking everything in. A change had occurred. The courtroom proceedings were over. However, her personal journey, that unconventional path she had constructed independently, using library books and YouTube lectures, was no longer hidden. Her mom entered the room. "Are you hungry?" she inquired. Naomi nodded, feeling ravenous. Sitting opposite each other at the small kitchen table, her mom inquired, "Do you truly desire to pursue this? Law? Seriously?" Naomi ate her sandwich deliberately, then responded, "Yes. I believe I already am." Her mom offered a look, a drawn-out, probing expression unique to mothers, and then nodded once. Following this, she stated, "Then you better continue demonstrating your capabilities." That evening, Naomi remained up reading, driven not by obligation, but by a sense of purpose. Analyzing legal precedent felt less like an assignment and more like a language she was finally proficient in. The following morning, she received another call, this time from a high school student from 2 towns over. "Hey," the girl said, "I saw what you did. My brother's case is similar. I don't know where to begin. Could I ask you a question?" And with that, Naomi evolved into something more, not just a bright student, not just a relative advocating for family. She stood as an illustration, a demonstration that excellence doesn't await authorization, and fairness doesn't demand a position, but only truth, clarity, and the courage to speak. She didn't require a law degree to impact a courtroom. She simply needed an opportunity. And when she received it, she ensured no one would ever perceive her identically again. Your voice doesn't need a platform. It merely needs to be heard. If Naomi's story resonated with you, ensure you subscribe and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded. The key isn't the origin, but the level of dedication you demonstrate.